little artist, so I'm going to show you how to make or draw and shade a bow, like a ribbon or a bow. The first part are a couple of shapes. So this is the first shape. It's kind of like a tall rectangle with rounded edges instead of pointed corners. It's rounded, as well as one attached. I'm going to put my camera a little bit closer so you can see these different shapes I'm about to make. And of course, we make mistakes. Please, it took me a couple of times to get it right for myself, so please practice before you think that you have your final right away, because this wasn't my final right away. I had to practice. Okay, and then it's a lot of cones going around, so I'm sketching a lot, making a lot of lines, figuring out how I want my cones shape to be, skinnier or wider. And then you could play around a lot with the different ones, because there's going to be a bunch of cones out from these two rounded corner rectangles. Okay, so there's one up top, there's one on the bottom left, and then there's one in the middle that's really big. There's one on this corner. Again, I'm sketching. So I'm drawing really lightly. If I draw harder with my pencil and my lead in my pencil, it's going to be very hard to erase. Sketching lightly. Here's another cone right underneath that top right one. Okay. Bottom corner right. You can play around with placement too. These are just where I put mine. A large one in the middle on the bottom. A tiny guy peeking out right here. Tiny guy peeking out right here. Starting to look like a flower. Tiny guy again in between those two. Here's a bigger one up top, in the very top. Just adjusting my camera again as we get larger. One in between here. And a big guy right here. All right. I'm adding a couple of these ovals on top. I wouldn't overdo it, just do it on a couple of them. That should be pretty much it before we get shading with color pencils, which I highly recommend color pencils. You can also do just pencil for a metallic-y silver metal looking bow. Those are really cool too. So if you don't have access to color pencils, pencil would work just as fine. I'm going to go ahead and get red color pencils, and that I'm going to use monochromatic color scheme, right? One color, or fancy word for color, is hue. So one hue or color with different values, right? So values are black, gray, and white. Shades, tones, and tints of the one color, which my one color is red today. Okay, getting started with coloring. This might you might want to watch a little bit before you go ahead and get started with me. So I kind of experiment with the different ways to apply my values with my red and to get my shading effect. So I add darker on the sides of each cone or each shape, and then I kind of lightly shade it out into a gradient. I as well add a little bit in the middle. So I'll have two white highlights. See those two white stripes? Those are my highlights where it shines, where the bow will shine from a light, a reflecting light. And then I'm going to add black to get a darker shade of red. I'm going to layer that with my red. I'm blending those two color pencil colors together. and I'm drawing very lightly. All right, and then I'm just going to keep going back and forth into it. I'm not gonna just throw everything in and expect to be done. It's a lot of layering and going over lightly with your color pencil. That's what shading is, right? Having a gradient from light to dark. Okay, I'm actually gonna come back to that first one, but let's get started to this middle rectangle. Okay, so again, I am adding a couple stripes of red. I'll leave some stripes of white for that highlight because each of these shapes will have at least 2 white highlights. I'm going to fast forward this part. Okay, I actually come back to that one as well. Again, it's a lot of layering and overlapping as you go with shading and creating balance over your whole piece. I'm adding a little bit of black in these open spots between the 2 rectangles and the cones. And I do add red on top of your black, okay? Because it's all red. It's just added value. So if you just put black there without any red mixed in there, it's not going to look as realistic. I even put my red on top of there. Yep. Going back to add some more value, more shade with my black. Always going back and forth between my different parts of my bow. All right, I'm going to do my second rectangle, my smaller one that's attached. And this time I found this way a lot easier for myself, which it might look different for you. Maybe you like the way that I did before, adding red first and then your value, but I personally liked as I continued through my bow, I found out that I like to add the black value first and then adding my red hue on top of my black and around my white highlights. Remember, you're always going to have at least 2 white stripes of highlight. I seem to like this process a lot more. I'm fast forwarding just to show you how I go between them all. I keep going back and forth between my shapes and my shading to create that balance between them, between my 3 shapes now that I've done. Don't be afraid to use that black. Don't be afraid to leave those white spaces. I even play around with adding some white color pencil in between there. It kind of gave me more of a pinky tint, which I later found out I'm not too much of a fan of, but I took a risk, right? And now I know next time I make it, I'm not going to use that white as much. Okay, so here's where I'm going to add that black value first, because me as an artist, I like that better, but again, you might like it adding the hue first and then adding the value later. So I'm pretty much making a black and white bow at this point with each shape, and then finally adding my hue. Right, I added my black. Now I'm adding my red hue. A lot of layering. Adding that red in those black areas too. So it is a black or a red shade. All right, I think I'm going to fast forward through the rest of my video for you to see my process. I don't show you the whole thing, but I will, of course, snap my fingers for you to see the ending of what my bow looks like at the end. Here we go. All right, so now I'm erasing all of that junk that I got from my hand rubbing against my drawing and my paper, which you should have as well. I recommend doing this because then your piece looks a lot more professional and clean looking without those smudges. And there's my final piece.